Hey all, this is Redditosker. Today I want to talk about Grounded 2. Grounded 2 was shown off at the Xbox Showcase, and out of all the games presented at all the different showcases, Grounded 2 is the one I care about the most. It wasn't the only one, there were a bunch of other minorly interesting things, stuff to keep an eye on, but I really liked the first Grounded. And I was sad that I played it after the point where making content for it was useful, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to make content for the sequel. I'm not sure yet how much, hopefully a substantial amount. So what is Grounded? Grounded is a survival action adventure game set in the early 1990s. You play as one of 4 teenagers that wake up and find themselves to be in a backyard, and they're mysteriously shrunk to the size of an ant. You can play by yourself, but it has up to 4-player co-op with each player controlling one of the teens, and the teens have voices, they have personalities, and they talk to each other, and they'll have voice lines depending on which teens are around. As you explore the yard, you will very quickly find recordings left behind by Wendell Tully, the doctor who invented the spacer which can shrink objects and people. Your goal in the game is to survive the dangers of the yard, follow the trail left by Wendell Tully, and get back home. There's a lot I like about this game. I'm a big fan of the tiny aesthetic. Any game that has you be small in big surroundings has a big advantage to me liking it. Things like Chibi Robo or Bug Fables, and Grounded does it really well. The yard looks really great, and the biomes are creative. You have a desert biome by having a sandpit. You have a underwater biome by having a pond. And even just the regular lawn areas are very pretty. I like that it wears its 90s inspirations proudly. It embraces the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids influence. And even though it's pretty and its art style is kinda stylized, it doesn't always have that adventurous atmosphere. It's hard, and because it's hard, it's often scary. Wolf spiders will patrol at night, and in the hardest difficulty, they will remain the toughest enemy for a good long while. I'm tempted to put the wolf spider in Grounded as the top 1 scariest enemy in the video game I played. I think it's a great game. But while I was playing it, I could never shake the feeling that it could be a lot better. It could be one of my all-time favorites, if some things were different. Grounded 2 is going into early access in July, and the devs have actively asked for feedback. So I see this as a great opportunity. I think Grounded 2 has huge potential, and could be my game of the year for the year that it fully releases. So for this video I'm going to go in depth with what I think Grounded 2 should do differently than the first game. I'm going to talk about what I think Grounded 1 did poorly, and my wish list going forward. For the first thing, let's talk about the combat. Grounded has a Sekiro deflect. If you block just as an enemy lands an attack, you will deflect that attack and receive no damage. You don't have to have a shield to do these perfect parries, you can do it with any weapon or even a bow. And they feel great to do, it gives combat a really interesting tempo. Bugs will have attack patterns and combo strings, and you'll have to learn the timing of these attacks to reliably do a perfect parry. I love the combat system, and I would do these parries anyway, but they're a little too effective, and the game is very parry-centric, to the point that you really shouldn't be doing anything else. Because you can't avoid attacks by moving out of the way or moving quickly out of the way. The attacks will kind of home in on you. The bugs, even in their combo strings, will lunge at you surprising distances, sometimes so far that it feels like they're teleporting. You can also just block attacks, but there's not really a situation where you would prefer to have blocked an attack than to parry it. And even if you do want to block because you're not confident in being able to parry an attack, it's not exactly either or. You can just kind of try to parry an attack, and then if you notice that you did it too early, you just hold down the shield and then block it instead of parry. The way I see it, parry is the only game in town. What I would prefer is if there were ways or reasons to do anything differently. So for example, Grounded actually has a surprisingly robust build-making system. The armor pieces that you craft from different bugs will have a passive effect. Wearing multiple pieces from the same bug will stack that same effect, and if you wear the full set, you'll get a set bonus. Or you could wear different armor pieces from different kinds of bugs to have a bunch of different effects. You'll end up foregoing your set bonus in that way, but it could still be effective depending on what you're trying to do. I would like for these different armor sets to allow you to lean into different playstyles more than they already do right now. So, for example, give benefits to making a blocking build, and ensure that those same benefits can't be gotten by somebody that's doing the same thing with parries. In Grounded, you can get the Black Ant armor set, and this armor set has the crit after block effect. This increases your critical hit rate for a few seconds after blocking. That's a cool effect. The problem is you also get it from parries. so it's not really a special benefit to people that want to tank. An example of what I'm looking for would be something like blocking attacks prevents the status effect that enemies are trying to apply with their attacks. Currently how it works is if you get attacked by an enemy that can poison you, you can avoid it poisoning you by doing perfect parries, but it can still poison you if you simply block. If you had an armor set whose full set bonus prevented that from happening, gave you the benefit of not getting a status ailments when you're doing just regular blocks, that would be ideal. There are multiple armor pieces in Grounded that improve your blocking ability. But again, most of these effects aren't actually about blocking. They trigger even on a parry. They're counted as the same thing, and leads to the problem of all playstyles really being extremely parry-centric. There's no reason for them to be anything else. Now for Grounded 2, there are already indications that this is going to be addressed. Because we can already see that not only do you have your parries and your blocks, you now also have dodging. And dodging gives us the ability of doing what I was asking for earlier, getting away from attacks, avoiding attacks, without, actually having to tank them and parry all of them. There also seems to be some kind of backstab mechanic, meaning that repositioning during an enemy attack so that you can take advantage of a backstab might be more optimal in certain situations than even just parrying everything. And this opens up another avenue of build making. You can have armor pieces and passive perks that lean into the dodge-centric playstyle. This way you're not just doing one thing or the other thing. You can decide that you like one way of playing more than the other and dabble in everything, or super lean into one. You'd be able to choose how to mitigate or avoid damage. Now the second thing I'd want is being able to start working towards your preferred archetype or build sooner. Because Grounded was an early access title, a lot of things were added late. And because they were added late, they were added to the end game, because the starting sections of the game, how the game was supposed to flow naturally from one thing to another, was already set. So for example, the magic staffs, the candy staffs, you can't get until you get to the upper yard, which means that most of the game would be over by the time that you get them. If you had a lot of game knowledge, you could just circumvent most of the game, go to the upper yard, grab the materials, make the candy staffs. But this isn't information you would have on a first playthrough. Most people playing normally would go most of the game without. A similar problem were the bows, the ranged weapons. There are tons and tons of melee weapons in the game, but for ranged weapons for bows, your selection is very limited. You have 3 bows, 1 of each tier, and 2 crossbows, 1 tier 2 and 1 tier 3. Even worse, on release, when it left early access, there weren't 3 bows, there were 2. The tier 3 bow wasn't added until 7 months later, and it was added as a reward for beating the difficult boss that was added in that update. And it's about as late game as it gets for Grounded. So if you wanted to make a range character, ranged build, using bows really just wasn't effective. You would be using the crossbows. In my opinion, bows and crossbows should be different. Just like how I think you should be able to make builds revolving around blocking or parrying or dodging, you should be able to make builds that are focused on either crossbows or bows. It's fine if some skills work with both, but there should be things that let you lean into one or the other. And with bows, they weren't really effective until the very end of the game. What I'm hoping for is that what we've seen of Grounded 2 so far indicates that this is not going to be a problem. They've shown off what looks like build archetypes for their upcoming early access. And those archetypes are like Rogue, Ranger, Fighter, and Mage. And given that these are things that we'll have access to in early access, then I hope that means that it's not going to be some kind of endgame thing for some of those classes. That there will be tier 1 and 2 staffs that you can get and replace as you move towards the higher tiers. And of course, more than one piece of armor that supports the mage playstyle. Alright, next thing I want is longer dungeons with better bosses. Grounded has dungeons, kind of. The first task that you're given is you're sent to 4 different labs that are in hostile insect territory. And the cool thing about these dungeons is that they're in interesting environments, and navigating your way to the lab is also kind of fun. They're kind of like Zelda dungeons in that there's a get to the dungeon section and then there's the actual dungeon section. One lab, for example, is nestled in the hedge, and to get to it, you have to go to the bottom of the hedge and navigate your way up through leaves and tree branches before tackling the lab proper. One lab is in a poisoned environment, so you need to craft a gas mask before you can even enter the environment, navigate through that haze, survive the infected explosive insects along the way, and I believe that you will need to have crafted an explosive to even get into it. The haze lab is actually one of the more interesting ones because the outside preparation was cool. You can't craft an explosive until you have a red ant egg, which means that you'll have to do even more prep work by going to the red ant nest. My problem is that the actual labs, the actual dungeon parts, most of them suck. They're too short, most of them don't have a boss, and out of the ones that do have a boss, only one of them is good. So, the hedge lab, for example. Getting to the lab is kinda cool, I like navigating the branches. But the actual lab part is very short, it gets done very quickly, the enemies inside it are very weak, and there's no boss at the end of the dungeon. And I realize that the hedge lab is the first of the labs that the game directs you towards, and so it needs to be more accessible than the other ones. And that's fine, but even if you can't add more dangerous enemies because of that, you can still make the dungeon longer, and you can craft a boss that is not super challenging and is still appropriate for early levels. Don't just have nothing. The best lab, I think, is the Black Ant lab, and it's because it's relatively lengthy. It's in the Black Ant nest, which makes it pretty dangerous. There's lots of ways to go and lots of interesting loot to find, and at the end of it, you get an actual unique boss that you fight. The assistant manager is the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I say you can design a boss that's appropriate for any point in the game. He's a great co-op boss. He himself is not super dangerous, but he can electrify parts of the field, he can activate lasers that you'll need to avoid, he can summon allies, and while all of this is happening, you still have to fight him. My opinion is that even the least interesting dungeon needs to have a boss of this level of quality. This should be the standard, the bare minimum. A lot of the other areas don't have bosses, and the ones that do aren't good. There is the boss in the haze, which is just a normal infected ladybug that you fight in an enclosed space with a bunch of other infected bugs as well. And then in the termite colony, there's the termite king, which is just not great. And I admit that I don't remember this boss very well, if you can even count him as a boss, but that's kind of the problem. My point is that every one of these dungeons, especially the story-relevant ones, should have a boss. Time, effort, and energy should go into making a unique boss, not just a version of the same thing you fought already, and certainly not nothing. The thing is, Grounded actually has really good bosses, but they're not integrated into the story. The game has 4 super bosses, and these are excellent. They're fantastic. They're very difficult, they have interesting mechanics, they are lengthy fights, they have cool music tied to them, and their presentation is top-notch. But I'm sad that they're restricted to just super boss status, these optional super boss things, because they might be the best content in the game, and I think that at least some of the dungeons or some part of the story should have a boss at the quality of something like the Broodmother that you have to beat before you progress. And I mention at its level of quality, it doesn't necessarily need to be as hard. Again, you can craft a boss, you can tune it for whatever difficulty you think is appropriate for that dungeon. But the quality, the effort, should be similar. So imagine instead of what we got in Grounded 1, each one of the first 4 labs that you have to visit has a unique boss at the level of quality of the assistant manager. But then the final lab, the hardest one, would have a boss as engaging and as cool as the Broodmother. And you might say that this is a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. And being able to put in more work, I think, is one of the benefits of Grounded 2. Because they're reusing, as far as I can tell, all of their assets. The art style is the same, the models are the same, all the textures are the same. That's not a criticism. I think everything looks great, it looks lovely, it's fine. But it also frees them up to put their energy elsewhere. And since we're talking about the labs, I guess this is a good place to move on to the water section. One of the labs that you need to get to is underwater. And getting to this lab through exploring the underwater areas is kind of like a mini Subnautica area, where much of the gear that you used for normal gameplay is not useful and you have to kind of reset, you're starting over. So you can't use bows in the water. Most of your weapons are ineffective apart from knives and spears. You can't hold your breath for very long or swim very fast, and so you have to gather materials from the upper areas of the pond and use them to craft equipment that will let you be underwater for longer and move more quickly, which lets you go lower. Okay. I really like the idea of this section. It's actually great to be in a position where your upgrades kind of don't matter, and you have to adjust to a new environment in a different biome. The problem is, it's so underbaked. The pond has one enemy type, and that's underwater spiders. I guess the water fleas are also an enemy type, but those only count because they happen to be hostile. They're not a serious enemy, they're not a serious threat. I'm not letting them sneak in here through a technicality. The biggest issue the pond has really is just enemy variety. There's nothing in there. If Grounded 2 has an underwater section, and I think that it should because it's a great idea, then it should continue to be a mini Subnautica-like, but it should lean into it even harder. So there should be the shallow part of it, where there are a few enemies and it's relatively safe, and as you craft more equipment and are able to go deeper, the pond becomes more and more dangerous. The only issue is, I'm not sure what you could put in a pond that would constitute these dangers. Maybe part of the reason why we only had the diving bell spiders was because it's hard to think of what else you can put in the pond that you can fight and harvest. Maybe you can have newt larvae. In Grounded, you had a koi fish in the pond, and he was unkillable. He was just like a environmental threat. Because it's gigantic, obviously you can't kill it. So if they can't think of things for you to fight, maybe they can put things in there that you're not supposed to fight. Small frogs or small fish. And it could be even more like Subnautica in that you are supposed to just avoid these leviathans. That could be fun too. Okay, my final criticism, and what I would like changed for the second game, has to do with the upper yard. In Grounded, the game is divided basically from the lower yard to the upper yard, and the upper yard has stronger enemies, it's more dangerous, and most of the bugs there are hostile. And the problem is that the upper yard is too hostile. Not that it's too hard exactly. So one of the best parts about Grounded is just being in the yard. And a lot of the stuff won't attack you unprovoked. The lower yard will just let you be, and this allows you to really soak in the atmosphere, which I think is amazing. But in the upper yard, most of the stuff will attack you on sight. Where in the lower yard, red ants and ladybugs would leave you alone, and in fact you could just approach them freely. Their upper yard counterparts are common and aggressive. And I think this hurts the game's atmosphere. It's hard to enjoy your surroundings when you're constantly getting attacked, and makes exploration less enjoyable than it was in the beginning. I'm not asking for the late game areas to be easier necessarily, I would just like traversing them to be less of a chore. Alright, I think that's everything. I'm sure I'll have more to say on Grounded soon. Until then, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.